Thanks for joining me. I'm Stephanie with the Early Years Parenting Support Program at Camray. And today we're going to be talking about being me, loving you, loving and caring for others while maintaining your own personal identity. I know I struggle with this as a mom, so I can imagine there's lots of other moms out there who feel the same way. So I wanted to start with some questions that I encourage you to think about. What is one self-care activity that you do for yourself? Is it active or passive? Is there an end goal or just a process? Is it something you actively do, like yoga, going for a run, going to work out, whatever that might be? Or is it passive? Mine tend to be really passive. Is it, sitting and watching a show, sitting and having some deep breathing? There could be lots of different ones that you might do. Reading a book. I guess it's not too active. Is there a process, or is there an end goal, or is it just a process, right? Is it just something that you do to calm down? Which of these feelings do you experience when doing things for yourself? Relief, relaxation, happiness, guilt, shame, stress, a little mix of all of them. And why do you think you experience those feelings? So when you do take that time for self-care, what emotions are you going through, and why do you think you go through those emotions? And I think I ask a lot because guilt tends to be at the forefront for most of us. And so it's important to understand why you feel guilty when you're taking care of yourself. I'm sure lots of people have heard this analogy before, but they often talk about on the airplanes when the oxygen masks come down, you have to put it on yourself before you put it on your child. You need to make sure that you're breathing well before you can address your child or anyone else that you might want to help. And so self-care is often talked about in the same way. You need to do things for yourself, otherwise you will not have the capacity and energy and mental health to be able to do things for others. This is a bit of a longer video than I normally show, but I really, really liked it. No idea who found it. Someone else showed it to me. But it's a mom who talks a little bit about losing her identity. And so I think it's really important to show. And then we can go into a little bit how to regain that identity.
Morning, everyone. I just wanted to talk a little bit about my struggles with becoming a mum and how More Than a Mum actually started. And a lot of it comes down to basically being in an identity crisis. So when I first became a mum, I really, really struggled. I found that my sense of self-worth was actually tied to my work and the skills and talents I used at work. And I found that these skills and talents were completely and utterly useless when it came to becoming and being a mum and learning how to do that. And so even though I returned to work, because I desperately craved adult interaction and being challenged and using those skills and talents, I found that I really didn't have the same passion and drive for what I did before I had my daughter. And something just felt off, like something was missing. And to add to all of that, I felt the overwhelming guilt of returning to work and not actually knowing whether that was the right thing to do for me, for my daughter, constantly second guessing the decisions I was making. But I also felt guilty for wanting to just be me again. And I couldn't consolidate that in my mind with the idea of now being responsible for this little girl. But there wasn't a day that went past after I returned to work, or even when I was planning to return to work, where I wouldn't stress over the decisions, where I wouldn't be triggered so easily to tears. I remember eating lunch on my own, thinking, this is great, I've got some freedom, and then all of a sudden I'd be in tears again. I'd be crying quietly to myself on my commute home from work and to work every day. And that became almost normal, which for me, I found hard to deal with that being my new normal. And even even a beautiful sunny day at work and going out for a walk during my lunch break, I would miss my daughter terribly and think, oh, we could be, spending this time together. So I wasn't getting what I needed from returning to work. Even though in my heart of hearts I knew that it was ultimately the right decision. So returning to the working world for me was the way that my identity was challenged. And it doesn't necessarily take that to know that you no longer feel like the person you did before you became a mum. I often hear the mums say to me, I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know how I'm supposed to adjust to this role of being a mum, but still feel like me. And quite simply, it comes down to one simple thing. Now, Dr. Alexandra Sachs is a widely recognised clinical psychologist who specialises in the developmental transition to motherhood. And she very aptly puts this in the words of, giving birth to a new identity is just as demanding as giving birth to a newborn child. It is so true. And yet we prepare ourselves for months, for years, even sometimes, for the birth of birthing a child and potentially what comes after. But we don't actually ever sit down and prepare ourselves or take the time after becoming a mum to evaluate what our life is like now, to evaluate who we are now. And this is the scary thing. Becoming a parent is such a huge transition, and not taking the time to fully adjust afterwards does lead to these identity crises, these states of, I don't know who I am, I don't know what I want, I don't know what's the best decision, I don't know how I can live as more than this role of being a mum. And so I quite often see, even with my own mum, women who go through years of not ever reconnecting with themselves and living a life of just being a mum. So More Than a Mum was born out of that, because I knew that my background in psychology was screaming at me internally, saying, this is not right. This is not the way to live. This is not the best way to be a mum and a woman. And so I went and found myself an answer. Now, all I can say to you today is that you need to give yourself the time to reflect. We quite often keep identifying ourselves with our past version of ourselves, so before we became mums, and that person definitely has changed. Maybe in little ways, maybe in big ways. But the point is if you don't sit down and work that out and reevaluate what you want from life now based on those changes, you may continue to go through life like I was for years as someone lost, as feeling constantly lost and second guessing yourself and not truly being happy. So that's my story, a little bit of my story. It's where
I mean, if you need to take a second and just process, I felt like, yes, it's a 6-minute clip, but there is a lot. And I don't know, some people might say that doesn't sound like my story at all. I felt like that sounded a lot like my story. And whether it's going back to work or something else, I think a lot of moms don't take the time, or parents, I should even say, don't take the time to stop and say, wow, I have a whole new identity. I've become a whole different person. Whether that person is a mix of who they were before and now being a parent, or I found my world slid 100% into being a mom, and I was so little of who I was before that it was like a shock to my mind. And so do I have, I think we're going to go through a few things that we can do. If I had the answer, I'd probably be a lot richer than I am right now. But I think just taking the time to figure out who you are again, who you are as a mom and you. So you're not who you were before. You're not just a mom, but you're somewhere in between, a mix of the two. And just taking, whether it is, watching this video, attending groups, chatting with friends, just taking a little bit of time to actually explore that idea of who you are now. I think as a parent, we're always doing things for the greater good of our children and our families, sometimes to the point that we no longer do things for ourselves, no longer feel that we have the right to ask for help, and that when we get it, we often feel guilty and ashamed. I really struggle with asking for support so that I can have some time for myself. And then often when I do get time for myself, I'm either using it to work or do things for the family. I feel like after I've done something for myself, it just feels like a giant waste of time. If I just wanted to go for a walk and I go for a walk, I come back and I actually feel awful afterwards because I'm like, that was such a waste of time. I could have done the laundry or clean this or clean that. So I have to tell myself in advance that the whole point is to not do those other things and to do something to take care of myself. Do we have to give up our needs in order to love someone? Many of us believe that if we love someone, we need to put their needs first. So we're stuck putting others' needs ahead of our own, with no one who can attend to our needs. So Dr. Marshall Rosenberg, who is from the Center of NVC, Nonviolent Communication, argues that healthy relationships involve us being true to ourselves and attending to our needs while also choosing to care for others. The emphasis here is on choice. So no one's making you feed your baby or do the laundry. You're choosing to do those tasks out of love and wanting to care for your family. The vast majority of people genuinely want to care for their loved ones. They genuinely want to do these things. We're just also exhausted at the same time. So there's two aspects of loving others while maintaining boundaries and meeting personal needs. One is learning to express our feelings and needs while empathically hearing others' feelings and needs. So it's not that it has to be one or the other, it's at the same time. And then the other thing here too is changing your narrative to acknowledge an internal locus of control and the possibility of choice. So back to that idea of you're choosing to do things for your family, that it's a choice because you care and love for your family. It's not being forced upon you. So I just wanted to watch this really quick video from on nonviolent communication.
Hi everyone, and welcome to this video. Today's big idea comes from Marshall Rosenberg and his pioneering book, Nonviolent Communication. As always, we hope we can inspire you, help you grow your mind, and motivate you to be the best you. In the book, Rosenberg shares with us a better way of communicating with others. He calls it nonviolent communication, a language of life. Communication is a fundamental building block of everyday life. If we want to function well in society, we need to learn to communicate effectively with the people surrounding us. Often, when we communicate with others, irrational conflicts and misunderstandings arise, and we end up leaving conversations feeling disregarded or in despair. This is where nonviolent communication enters the stage. At its core is the belief that all human beings have the capacity for compassion and empathy. We only resort to harmful behavior when we don't identify more effective strategies. The purpose of nonviolent communication is to help us connect with ourselves and others in a way that makes compassionate giving natural. It is not about convincing people to do what we want, but to create a connection with another person where everyone's needs are met. Nonviolent communication is a way to resolve differences peacefully. It is all about empathetical listening and honest expressing. It teaches us to understand and express our feelings and to hear our own deeper needs and those of others. It evolves around two fundamental questions. Number one, what is alive in you? Or put another way, what are you feeling? Number two, what would make your life more wonderful? Meaning, what unfulfilled needs do you have that I can help you meet? It seems straightforward, but expressing emotions and needs is not easy. Many of us have never learned to acknowledge our own feelings. We have grown up being told things like, boys aren't scared, or girls shouldn't get angry. And as a result, many people hide how they actually feel, even from themselves. Nonviolent communication helps us to communicate our feelings clearly. Nonviolent communication distinguishes between real expression of emotions and statements which are in fact descriptions of what we are thinking, not what we are feeling. Let us give you a couple of examples where people think they are expressing a feeling, when in fact they are expressing an opinion, a criticism, or a moral judgment. Number 1, when I feel is followed by that, like, or as if. For example, I feel like you should know better. Number 2, when I feel is used together with pronouns. For example, I feel I am constantly working. Number 3, when I feel is used with names or nouns. For example, referring to people, I feel Amy has acted irresponsibly. None of these statements is actually letting the other person know what you are feeling. Instead, you should simply name the emotion you are feeling without any judgment. For example, I feel sad because, or I feel angry since, and so on. Expressing our feelings clearly is very important, but we need to also express the need behind the feeling by making a clear request of what we want from the other person. Judgments, criticisms, and interpretations of others are all estranged expressions of our needs. And when we use them, we imply that the person in front of us is behaving wrongly, when in fact we all know is that the person isn't acting according to our beliefs and values. If someone says, "You never listen to me," it is them telling you that their need to be heard is not being met. But because the statement is made as a judgment, the recipient is likely to hear criticism. And criticism often leads to self-defense and counterattacking instead of understanding. The more directly we can connect our feelings and our needs, the easier it is for others to respond compassionately. So, focus on your own needs instead of on what is wrong with others. Imagine an interaction between two colleagues, Alan and Bart. They have a meeting scheduled for 1 p.m. Alan arrives to the meeting on time. Bart, however, doesn't arrive until 1:15 p.m., leaving Alan frustrated. As soon as Bart enters the room, Alan blurts out, "It is really annoying that you are always late for meetings. You are an irresponsible person." If Alan was familiar with nonviolent communication, the conversation could go like this instead. "I feel angry because you are late. I would like to start the meeting on time, since it will otherwise disrupt my calendar for the rest of the day. Can I please ask you to be on time for our next meeting?" Nonviolent communication also teaches us that we cannot be responsible for each other's feelings, but we can be responsible for how we choose to react. Let's end the video with a tip on how to best express our needs. Instead of expressing our needs with a kick-me attitude that implies that they are a burden, Rosenberg suggests that we use a Santa Claus attitude, showing the world that our needs are a precious gift. We hope you have enjoyed this video on Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent.
So, moving on with that, more videos, I'm sorry. But there's so many great little videos that can capture things a lot more efficiently than I can. So I think with the previous slide here, we're looking at the nonviolent communication stuff because we need to figure out what our needs are. In order to figure out who we want to be and what our identity is, part of that is figuring out, taking the time, being able to request that we need that time to figure it out and sort through some of our thoughts and feelings. But what I often find happens with moms is that they figure out what they need in order to feel like themselves again, but then they can't have those needs met, or they're not sure how to articulate it. So equipping yourself with the tools and the beliefs of what you need in order to have your feelings heard and your needs met is so important, so that you can go to your partner, you can go to other caregivers, you can go to people at work, whoever it might be that you need to express yourself to, so that you can have a good balance between seeing yourself as a mom and your own and balancing your own identity. Empathy versus sympathy. So when responding empathically, be sure that you're using real empathy and not sympathy. So I think this has to do with whether it's a partner, coworkers, kids, and using empathy in the way that you communicate.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy: perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth; staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do; recognizing emotion in other people, and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, I'm down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. At least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
I think that was Brene Brown. If you get a chance to look up some of her other videos, they're really good. Oops, let's stop that there. So listening empathically does not mean to comply or to give in. And what's important here is when we're setting boundaries and we're trying to figure out who we are as parents, as moms, and we're trying to love our children, but at the same time love ourselves and do what we need for ourselves, it means you can still use proper communication. You can still respond with empathy, but you can also still hold a boundary and not give in if it doesn't fit with who you need to be. So an example here of responding empathically is, I can see how sad you are because you really wanted to go outside. I wish it wasn't raining so we could all play outside. What are some other fun things we can do inside instead? Or I'm hearing that you're frustrated and I don't make time for you anymore. It hurts me to know that you feel so rejected by me. I really wish there was a way for me to have more time for you, right? I think that second one might hit a little closer home for a lot of moms, especially if you're a working mom. I often have to say things like this to my child, and I've had a lot of people actually ask me why I still work. You know, oh, your husband works, your kids want you there, they're so young. And I feel really, really guilty about the fact that I work. I think living in the Lower Mainland, most households need 2 incomes. So other than necessity at this point, I would have to be pretty honest that even if it wasn't a necessity, I would still want to work. Before I even had children, I had that conversation with my husband that work keeps me sane. I did a lot of schooling to get where I am, and I was like, I just can't imagine not using the knowledge that I have and not being in the line of work that I'm in. I work a lot less than I used to as a way to balance the job that I love and being able to raise my children. But I often have to fend off people who are asking me why I still do A, B, C, D, and that I should just be there for my kids. And I, even though it is a necessity, I rarely use that as a response. And I always say, this is just what I need for me. I love what I do. And I want my kids to see that I love what I do. I want to set an example of what it's like to have a career that you're happy in, that you love. So that balance, that identity that I have, that I need for me, and being able to respond to other people. But importantly here, being able to respond to my partner and my children so that when they feel like I'm not able to give them the attention that they need, I can balance it out with, rather than responding and saying, well, I'll just quit my job so I can spend more time with you. Well, that's not a reality. The boundary is that I want to work. And so I can respond empathically and respond to my children about how hard it might be to not have me around all the time. So expressing needs and feelings, there's a 4-part nonviolent communication process. So you can clearly express how you're feeling without blaming or criticizing. It was in the little video, so I'm going to speed through this. But it's your I statements. It's I feel, and then the emotion, sensation, rather than a thought in relation to what I observe. And then the observation, when I, and then needs, because I need, value, and the request, would you be willing to, or I would like. And then there's a concrete action. I always laugh at this one because my husband's like, I need like an actual concrete action, and he needs it really to be spelled out for him. And sometimes I think I'm being clear, and I'm often not being clear. And so we have this back and forth until he realizes, okay, she's expressing the feeling, she's expressing the need, and the observation, but he will often have to go back and clarify what the actual request is, because I usually leave that one out. And this whole thing in the previous video we watched was Bart, and I can't remember the other guy's name, but the 2 guys at work who were, the one was late for the meeting, and he used the I statement to communicate his needs. You want to be sure to be clear and concise. Don't leave the other person to guess what you're really trying to say or what your needs are. So instead of what have you been doing all day? The sink is full of dishes and the beds haven't been made. It would really help me if you could do the dishes while I start cooking dinner. Again, this is really clear, concise requests so that the anger doesn't grow. Arguing, if one or both parties see the discussion as an argument, then it's always going to be about something winning. There's someone winning. And I think nonviolent communication isn't about being on opposite sides. It's about coming together on the same side. So we try to reframe our thoughts as looking at the greater picture of sometimes one person's needs need to get met, and other times the other person's needs need to be met. So as we're on this journey of finding out who we are again and finding out what we need in order to feel like not just a mom or not just a parent, it's helpful to kind of step back and look at that greater picture and to figure out, how do multiple people's needs get met? It's not me holding a boundary or setting a rule or trying to find time for my own identity and self. Doesn't mean I'm going to get that all the time. In fact, I'm lucky to get it sometimes. So it's about meeting a compromise in a way that works for the whole family. You're also going to be less resistant to meeting someone else's needs if you view it as a choice and a problem to be solved instead of a winning or losing. Is it really a choice? The change is not the situation itself, but rather the narrative we tell ourselves about why we're doing what we're doing for ourselves or for others. So rather than perceiving a situation as I must feed the baby, we can reconstruct that narrative and say, I love my son, I want him to be healthy. In order to meet my need for that, he needs to be fed. This narrative is so, so important as a mom because we often can feel like everything is about meeting other people's needs. And so when we can reframe that as a way of saying, but I'm also meeting my own need. Keeping my child healthy is a need that I have. I love my child. I want them to be safe and healthy. It's not changing the situation or the fact that it's exhausting work, but simply changing the way we see it so that our mental health can remain intact. With this reframe, the same act is now more about meeting your own needs than meeting your child's needs. So this is when we can't change a situation, then we have to kind of change how we think about it. It's a balance between having time and energy to only focus on yourself and to only focus on your own identity and your own needs. The balance is when you can't, you need to see the other things that you're doing as also meeting your needs. I despise cleaning, but the only thing I despise more than cleaning is a messy house. And so I often have to sit there and reframe that part of what I'm doing for myself is I need a neat and tidy house. And as much as I hate cleaning and exhausting as it is, I'll be in the middle of cleaning up my kids' mess or cleaning this, cleaning that. And I'll have to say to myself, I'm actually meeting my own need here. As angry as I am in the moment, I'm meeting my own need because I feel less anxious and more calm in a neat and tidy home. And that reframe helps me see that I'm not cleaning up after other people. I'm cleaning because I want the house clean. What is a narrative? A narrative is some kind of retelling, often in words, of something that happened, a story. The narrative is not the story itself, but rather the telling of the story that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So, for example, I went to the grocery store yesterday. My son had a tantrum so loud that the whole store could hear it. Everyone was looking at me like I was the worst mother on earth. It was so embarrassing that I just left my cart in the aisle and walked out of the store to be with him. My son's impossible, and I can't take him anywhere. So reframing that narrative with the same example is, I went to the grocery store yesterday. My son didn't take his regular afternoon nap and he was really irritable, and I knew it was a bad idea to take him out. He ended up having a really loud tantrum in the store. Some people seemed offended, but a couple moms looked like they felt bad for me. One mom even tried to help me by offering my son a treat to distract him. I knew that there was a chance he couldn't handle the trip and that he really just needed to relax at home. So I left the store and brought him home. As soon as we got inside, he calmed down and ended up napping for an hour. A thing that I love to use with narratives and reframing is humor. I can have some really off situations, and I have another mom friend, and my thing, what we do for one another is reframe situations with humor. And I'm talking even the most awful situations. And now I find when really bad things or embarrassing things happen, instead of being upset about them, I'm so excited to call her and tell her about this awful situation that I've had, or this really embarrassing situation. The other day I was going on it was a little while ago, we were living out of town and we were going up on a trolley with my kids. And I had never been to the place before and I hadn't used a trolley. And so I folded up my buggy because you had to go upstairs to get on the trolley. So I'm yelling at the kids, get on the trolley. And I'm folding up the buggy and two men come up and offer to help me. I'm like, no, I can do it by myself. And I hadn't realized that the buggy had hooked onto my dress and fully pulled it up. So my underwear were showing. And I wasn't even embarrassed at the moment because I didn't know what was happening. And then over the speaker system, the driver of the trolley, it's like there was multiple carts, and the driver at the front just said, oh, just giving out a gentle reminder that if you need to bring buggies on the trolley, you can come to the front and we will let you use the wheelchair lift. And I thought that information would have been useful. And in the moment, I had that bit of embarrassment. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I can't wait to call my friend and tell her how embarrassed I am right now. And what happened is my frustration in the moment and my embarrassment dissipated within seconds because I had a good laugh at myself and I knew that my friend would have a good laugh too. And that helped the moment to help me feel better about what was going on. So locus of control, this is another concept that's great if you're trying to sort through some of this stuff. It's a belief about whether so the internal one is that the outcomes of our actions depend on what we do, and external is that the outcomes of our actions depend on events outside of our personal control. This is really important when you're trying to figure out who you are again, because what we see is when there's an external locus of control, it's a victim mentality. It's people who tend to fall into depressions more easily, right? You think your fate is decided and it's happening to you. The mistake isn't, I didn't make a mistake. This was someone else's fault. I'm a victim. I never get what I deserve. It's quite a miserable way of living. And so when we take an internal locus of control and we try to shift that focus internally, it's about controlling your own destiny. And there isn't a better way to figure out who you are again than when you feel like you're in control. Saying, oh, I had my kids control everything, my husband chooses everything, my wife does this. Saying, no, it's within me. I get to decide who I am now. And it's so, so important in order to have that control so we can take charge of our own narrative. So take a second, think about why you think an internal locus of control is important when trying to be heard and get your own needs met. If we understand our control on the situation, we're more likely to be assertive both in requesting to have our needs met and to follow through with getting all or some of them met without guilt. So that's what we may need in order to figure out what those needs are, have the needs met, get some time for ourselves, and reconnect with who we are outside of being a parent. I've gone through this material quite quickly. So if there's any further questions, you can give us a call at 604-436-9449 to see which services may be applicable to you. You can email us at admin@camray.ca, which is the general email, or our Early Years Parent Support Program, which is PSP Group Sign Up at camray.ca. And you can check out our website at www.camray.ca. I really hope that the information today was useful and helpful, but again, you can contact us if you'd like to follow up and get more information.